Okay. That'll call to order the regular meeting of council for Tuesday, September the 15th. Are there any members of the public wishing to ask a question? Looking to the only member of the public here. I see none. Looking then to the agenda, there is one addition in camera, a legal matter. Is there anything else? That I'll move the agenda be approved with that addition. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Looking to the minutes of the September 1st regular meeting of council, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move the minutes be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And looking to the minutes of the public hearing for Tuesday, September the 8th, are there errors or omissions on those minutes? Seeing none, I'll move that they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And we'll move on down to item F1, Bylaw 2015-17, an amendment to Bylaw 01-2003, Spring Creek Mountain Village Area Redevelopment Plan. Are you looking at me like you don't have that on your agenda? Okay, so it's a bylaw regarding Spring Creek Mountain Village. Did you want to?
Yeah, I hit my button.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong place there. Next speaker, thank you.
Thank you. I will be recusing myself from this decision due to conflict of interest.
Proceed.
Thank you.
The minutes will reflect that. Okay, Mr. Sorfleet.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council. As you just stated, I'm here to present Bylaw 2015-17. It's an amendment to both the land use district for the Spring Creek Mountain Village commercial area in the north and to the Spring Creek Mountain Village ARP. Both amendments are required to enact what is being proposed. Just want to give you a quick overview of really the salient parts of the amendment. The amendment is to building height, to streetscape and signs, and to connections between buildings. And I'll get into these in a bit more detail. Building height, we see on the left, currently in the Spring Creek Mountain Village ARP and in the DC SCMVC district, the area identified on the left as D and B are restricted to heights of 14 meters and 9.5 meters. 9.5 meters for D, 14 meters for B. The proposed change is on the right, where we see some portions of B, show this here, some portions of B being changed to Zone A, which exists elsewhere in the Spring Creek Mountain Village area. So from 14 meters to 16 meters, and Zone D from 9.5 meters to 12 meters. In addition, there's an amendment that would allow for up to 5% of the building to be granted a variance to exceed these heights by 20%. The applicant put together some illustrations of what the implications are with respect to height. I go into detail in my staff report about percentages of mountain that disappears. But in essence, you'll see the purple line on each of these drawings shows what can currently be built at 14 meters, and this is using the biggest building. It doesn't cover the entire site. So at 14 meters, the purple line, at 16 meters, the yellow line, and then the orange line on top of that is the potential 5% of the building that could exceed that by 20%. The orange line isn't quite exact, but it's there for illustrative purposes, so portions of the roof and whatnot may extend that high if this bylaw were approved. Part of the applicant's rationale for the height change includes floor-to-ceiling heights, so 4 meters on the ground floor and 3 meter floor-to-ceiling heights for each of the subsequent 3 stories. 4 meters on the ground floor does appear to be a good approach for commercial space, so the ground floor would have retail and central conference facilities. 12 feet, 4 meters is a fairly good standard that allows for moving of sprinkler heads, HVAC systems, lighting, drop ceilings and whatnot. That works quite well for retail. 3 meters floor to ceiling, or pardon me, floor to floor for the other stories is a little bit higher. That's approximately 9 feet, and we have seen in the residential end of the spectrum an increase in what the market wants, from 8-foot ceilings to 9-foot ceilings to 10-foot ceilings to 11, or whatever the current standard is. 9 in a commercial building appears to be, again, a reasonable approach. There are different mechanical systems in a commercial building and whatnot. So it's not a big leap to look at a 9-foot floor-to-floor height. The other portion of this is the roof itself. Now, the applicant states that they will be doing a real roof, so a roof that runs from eave to peak. Elsewhere in Spring Creek Mountain Village, we have things called a mansard roof, where there's a portion of the roof that's visible and then it flattens out once it's outside of view. In this case, they're proposing a real roof, and if you project a real roof along the building diagrams that were submitted with this application, it would actually go quite a lot higher than 16 meters. So it appears as though the roof will actually be 2 roofs, sort of like an M in the wider sections of the building. There are impacts, of course, to the height. If I go back, I'm just going to go back here for a second. When we look at the Nakota Massif, there's more mountain visible from the locations where shops were selected. It's really Grotto and Lady Mac that have most of the mountain covered up. Again, the purple line's what can be built already, yellow what can be built in the future. So the impacts are greater, or greatest, in close proximity to the development. As we get further out, the perspective on that height drops. And so as you can imagine, the further away from something you are, the smaller it looks. So as we get further and further away from the center, we have lower and lower impacts. It doesn't mean there is no impact, it just means that it's lower. This little black wedge here shows an area where the impact is even, we'll say, less. And that's because the building to the northwest blocks the biggest building. So it's going to be closer in perspective, and it, in effect, by being there, mitigates the building to the southeast. Thankfully, there aren't a lot of properties up in that direction. Streetscape and sign. This is kind of an all-in-one amendment. The applicant is looking to do an internal arcade. And what that is we'll say, one-sided retail on an interior corridor, and the other wall of that interior corridor is on the street. You can see in the green arrow there that interior arcade. In order for an arcade to work from an efficiency perspective, building articulation should ideally be less. I have a drawing that will illustrate that in a moment. So with the internal arcade comes less building articulation. One of the rationales for this that was put forward by the applicant was that the retail and commercial spaces within these hotels are targeted towards hotel guests. And the intent is for hotel guests to be able to visit those shops without having to put their coats on or their winter boots on. That also is part and parcel of the bridge and tunnel connections that we'll talk about in a moment. So the internal arcade, with an internal arcade, and I apologize, the drawing's fairly crude. If we look at the blue lines on the right-hand side of the screen here, let's say that's a building with a lot of articulation. Now let's make an assumption that the interior hallway needs to be 2 meters wide, 6-ish, 6 and a bit feet. So it needs to be that wide at its narrowest point, not at its widest point. And so a bunch of the interior volume of the building gets somewhat sterilized by that articulation, where a narrower building, a lower amount of articulation can actually bring the retail even closer to the street. So 2 parts with this. One, if there is an arcade, a little bit less articulation can be advantageous to push the retail closer to the street. And 2, it can make the building itself more efficient. So these amendments sort of go hand in hand, the articulation and the arcade. Some perks of an arcade. Generally, we discourage internally oriented retail in Canmore. The arcade itself may provide warm walking space in the winter that would run along the sidewalk. There is proposed to be several entrances into that arcade. The retail it doesn't seem unreasonable to treat the retail within that hotel as targeted at hotel guests rather than it's not unavailable to locals, but it's likely to be targeted towards hotel guests. That's their traffic. Signs on the exterior of the building. Now, typically signs are only allowed on a business frontage, so where the business fronts onto the street. And again, if the business is fronted onto the street, articulation makes a bunch of sense. In this case, with lower articulation and no signs on the street, it would actually make the street likely feel quite dead. So by having the ability to put some of those business signs on the street to encourage people to just come into the shelter, that may actually improve the streetscape. Again, all of this part and parcel of that arcade concept. Now, the last piece is connecting buildings. These are two interesting proposals. One is on the lower left side of the screen. That is a tunnel between two buildings, and the other is a bridge between two buildings. So this is to connect what is proposed to be 3 hotels that are all one building. Each has its own approach. So with the tunnel, this is an artist rendering of what the bridge may look like crossing at the 3rd story. So the tunnel is proposed to go under an area that has been identified as land that will become MR. In discussions with engineering, it doesn't seem advantageous to take MR and then allow a tunnel underneath it. There's some liability that could crop up. Better to not take the land as MR and have an easement over the top of it to use it all, but then not be responsible for anything that happens underneath. This could lower the amount of MR that we actually receive in Spring Creek Mountain Village, and recall that Spring Creek Mountain Village as a whole is intended to contribute 15% or greater in MR. Points towards this, that MR could be made up in other areas of Spring Creek Mountain Village. It is a relatively small portion, or it could be paid cash in lieu. Public will have an easement over that area, so it would still function like MR, even though it wouldn't actually be MR. And again, there's no desire to permit a tunnel under town-owned land. So if a tunnel were permissible, the idea would be to not have it on municipal land. In terms of the plus 30 or 3rd story bridge, it's roughly 10 meters in the air. That's where the plus 30 comes from, 30 feet. It creates the proposed bylaw creates an opportunity, not a right. And what I mean by that is the bridge is proposed to go over municipal road right-of-way. The land use bylaw can't bind a property owner to do something. So with the road right-of-way, if in the end the town decided that the bridge is not something that the town's interested in, as the owner of that property would say no. No appeal. So what the bylaw does is allows us to consider it as part of a development application, and then the use of that space would have to come back to council for approval. It's intended to connect the development. It does provide an entry feature into Spring Creek Mountain Village. There are no concerns about the bridge itself raised by the engineering department. There's good clearance and an alternate entrance into Spring Creek Mountain Village. We do see these in downtown Calgary as well, connecting buildings. Beyond that, certainly before anything would be permitted, we'd need to hammer out the legal relationship of either a lease or who owns the bridge and whatnot. All of that would be determined prior to any approval of such a bridge. Digress from the implications of the bylaw and the changes proposed to the SSR itself. As noted in my report, there is one minor input error in the SSR, and that had to do with built green, with registering with built green rather than shadowing built green. They do note that they proposed covered bike parking. That could be enshrined in the district. It isn't. The SSR does score positively, and it does score positively irrespective of the input error for green building. It's not in the SSR, but in the commercial assessment, the proposed assessment of the building is about $50 million, and that represents a 6.4% increase in the commercial assessment base. So it's a rather substantial commercial project. Other observations, again, as I just mentioned, the increase in commercial assessment, that's consistent with our MDP goal of reaching a 60-40 residential to non-residential assessment ratio. It moves us in that direction. The proposed visitor accommodation and potential conference facility appears to be in alignment with Goal 1B of the business plan. And while it wasn't done for this specific amendment, previous amendments to the Spring Creek Mountain Village ARP have included an infracycle analysis, and that infracycle analysis shows positive economic impacts from Spring Creek's development. An inference here is this commercial development, and commercial development tends to increase your infracycle score, not decrease it. With that, the recommendation from administration is that council provide first reading to bylaw 2015-17 and schedule a public hearing for October 13th at 6 p.m. Happy to try and answer any questions if you have them.
Thanks very much. I'll lead off with a few, or at least one. So, just around the notion that the commercial assessment potential is increased by adding height to the building. So, I think that generally speaking, commercial assessment on visitor accommodation type properties is based on revenue.
Correct.
So simply increasing the height shouldn't increase commercial assessment.
Correct.
So the assessment's based on 200 rooms at X dollars per night plus all of the other revenue associated. Yeah. And I'm curious if you can speak a bit, I guess, for the applicant at this point, but if the approved heights were deemed adequate, 10 years ago, or around 2003, has hotel design really changed that much in 10 years, or?
I'm going to try and address, I think I heard two questions. One was about how we could consider the increase in, or how we could relate the increase in height to a potential increase in commercial assessment, and the other piece is how has building design changed that necessitates this. On the one, with respect to assessment, you're correct. Assessment is based on the revenue potential of the property. It's my understanding in speaking with Mr. Watson that hotels are classified based on, for lack of a better term, swankiness. A nicer hotel has a higher revenue potential. When building a commercial building, additional volume is not leasable area necessarily, so it can be seen as a negative within the pro forma of that development. The implication of the proposed height change is that the proponent is trying to build a nicer hotel. Also, and this relates to the height, and I can't verify this, but the applicant has stated that under the current land use, they're permitted up to 200 units, but they do not believe they could build 200 units and include a conference facility within that volume. So the additional height really, what would have been a 3.5-story building with the top floor built into the roof becomes a 4-story building, and they're able to get those 200 units within that space. I can't verify that though.
Okay. Throughout your report, the wording seems a little, somewhat tentative from administration's perspective. I don't know if that was intentional. There's a lot of references to the applicant suggests, and it seems reasonable that. Is that meant to be really solid support from administration or tenuous in nature? So when an applicant makes a claim that's unverifiable, I won't take that as fact. I will state that they make a claim. If it's verifiable, then I may use different language. On the whole,
again, providing a recommendation for first reading. The application appears to hang together. There are a couple of things. There's a question of, does the impact of height, the net impact of an increase in height, is it outweighed by a net benefit to commercial development in proximity of hotel beds to the downtown core? That's a bit of a question, and it depends. The land use district doesn't ensure that a building will be built to that size. It only creates the opportunity for it. In the end, a building could be built that was much smaller and would therefore not have the positive impacts, but also likely not the negative impacts that we're looking at. So yes, in my report, I do talk about what the applicant claims or states, because that is their opinion, that is what they are stating. I do try and address that to see if it's a reasonable statement, or I don't think I've outlined any where I think it's unreasonable.
No, you haven't. So just one other related question, and there's other questions on the board, but Mr. Fark wanted to...
Sorry, I just want to add to that at this point in the process, administration's recommendation is to move to first reading. So it's support for movement to first reading. It is not necessarily support for the application, right? The first reading implies in a public hearing and a full process.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons why the language in the report would be cautious, because it's simply support for first reading.
Thank you. Just along the same line of thought, though, then the preference to go for a full roof rather than a mansard roof, can you say with any comfort how much additional elevation is required to go to a full roof rather than accept a mansard roof?
Yeah, if we assume a 20-meter wide building, which is about the size of a single corridor building, and start at 13 meters at the top of wall on the outside perimeter of the building. So the midpoint of the roof, that's 10 meters in. At an 812, we're looking at 6.6 meters higher. So if it was a single roof across a 20-meter span, when you take the 13 meters and the 6.6, we're looking at 19.6 meters to the peak of that, if an 812 was built to the edge of the wall. And that's why I presume it would be an M-shaped roof rather than a...
But a mansard roof wouldn't go to that height.
Correct, yeah. A mansard roof tends to go back far enough for optics,
Yeah.
and then either flatten out or recess for mechanical
Right.
systems. They're
So
throughout Spring
Are
Creek.
you able to indicate how much additional height is required to go from the mansard up to the full roof?
That would depend on the mansard. A really bad one, you wouldn't need much.
Well, of course,
So-
at Spring Creek, it wouldn't be really bad.
I can't really answer that question. You would need less height to do a mansard roof, certainly.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that's the point of my question.
Perhaps when the proponent speaks at when the applicant speaks at the public hearing, you could ask that question.
Perhaps it could. Just one other related question then, and then I'll move on. So in the the image you projected overhead, there was an additional line that reflected the possible full impact on views if there was a 20% variance allowed for.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's different from what's showing in the report that's part of council's package.
Correct. The report in council's package shows the 14-meter existing height and the 16-meter proposed, but it doesn't account for potential variances. Now, important to note, they are still considered variances. So anything above that 16-meter line would be appealable.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Patrick. Just, you used the term, in the course of your report, you used the term tunnel and bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Are you using those interchangeably?
No.
Please differentiate them. I mean, I get tunnel is going under?
Yes. So the piece around the green MR, that would be underground.
Okay.
So at parkade level, connection between the two buildings.
Got it.
It may not be fully underground, it may be partially above ground and berm over it. That would, again, all depend on whether or not they could build that above flood elevation. So land use doesn't speak to the exact design, they still need to meet the engineering guidelines. And then this bridge is,
The plus bit.
yeah,
All right, it seems to be interchangeable. Thank you.
my apologies.
Good answer.
Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Worship. Mr. Starfleet for the presentation. Just a couple of quick clarifications. So in the views where you showed the variant, we of course have to keep in mind that nothing would go right across. We're talking about portions of the building could potentially reach the higher. You wouldn't have a building going right across on that the orange line. That's where it could potentially peak up for a certain percentage of the roof.
correct. And I'm just trying to remember this. I believe up to 20% of the roof could
Right.
exceed by 10%, and up to 5% of the roof could exceed by 20%. So that orange,
which allows for the peak
correct,
of the building.
or chimneys and stuff like that.
Yeah. The other question I had is, in your report, you indicate that administration would recommend a suggested minimum articulation, and that's not in the bylaw that's before us right now. So is it that administration would come back with, if we approve tonight, and then after public hearing, would come back with a suggested revision as we go to second reading?
Correct.
Okay, great, thanks.
Did, Mr. Fart, did you have something else to speak to? No. Councillor Stanford?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Mr. Starfleet, for your presentation. I just have a question for you on, well, it's on page 63 of my agenda, but it's section 3.19.4.11. And it's in regard to employee accommodation. It's in reference to 25% of employee accommodation shall be provided. Is that an opportunity, or is that a requirement in this particular case?
That is existing within the district already,
Okay.
and I believe it is a requirement. Currently, maybe going a little far here, but currently employee housing is handled within the rest of Spring Creek Mountain Village, but as those units get eaten up, the requirement is to provide them.
So if this particular development goes through, then 25% of it will be employee housing, or 25% of the total of Spring Creek? Is that how it works?
25% of the employees generated by the hotel would require employee housing.
Okay. And so that is a requirement. That's not an opportunity? That's
It's already in
Yeah.
the approved plan.
okay. And but I'm just noting that in the SSR there was points given for employee housing as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's linked to this then, in relation to it?
That they're doing it already doesn't mean that it's not a positive benefit.
Okay.
So it
So
would
it still appears in the SSR as a positive?
correct. And similarly, the infracycle model that was done previously, but it applies to this same amendment.
Okay. And is it mostly the hotel that we're looking at, the height restriction, increasing the height restriction?
The district as a whole is only commercial.
Okay.
So, I'll back up here.
It's visitor accommodation?
Yes, this is the DC, these ones are confusing. Spring Creek Mountain Village Commercial District versus Spring Creek Mountain Village CR, which is comprehensive residential.
Okay.
And it wasn't deliberately confusing, but that's just how the names panned out.
And that's what we're talking about, increasing the height restriction on the
Correct.
commercial district?
Correct.
Okay. But then within that component, there's visitor accommodation,
Which is commercial.
which is commercial, so
Yeah.
that's all encompassing.
It's all visitor comm or conference. That whole
Lower floors
that
is-
whole area was approved in the ARP as commercial with visitor accommodation and boutique hotels with ancillary convention service and retail components. That's already approved in that area.
Yeah.
So, and it's just that area that they're looking for change in height.
Okay, and so that is linked to the employee housing, the visitor accommodation part, that part, okay. And then the next one, 3.19.4.12, talks about the 15-meter setback that will not have parking as one of the uses in it. Is that correct? Just because there is a relaxation of that setback
Sorry, could you
requirement?
state the section again?
It's right after the one that I talked about,
319.412.
319.412. So it's just, I think you covered it in your staff report, but you didn't actually mention it.
This,
That with the parking, there won't be parking in that.
and this section isn't changing. This section is already permitted within the land use, or it's already existing. In my presentation, I only touched on the changes rather than the existing district.
Okay. I thought that variance was to be provided in this, or that's already been approved?
That is already in the district.
Okay. So just to confirm that there won't be any parking in that area, because that's already been approved then.
Yeah, in that section you're reading, page 63 in the agenda, that's the red line of the existing control of the district.
Right.
So all of the text in black is from the original, not
Okay.
changed.
Yeah, so the text in blue and the text in red are the proposed changes.
Okay.
And as His Worship says, the black is existing.
All right. Thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for your presentation. I just was curious about the difference between enrolling in the Built Green program and shadowing the Built Green program. What does shadowing a program entail?
Shadowing the program is very similar to the Town of Canmore green building process, where you use the checklist. In this case, they would be doing EE4 modeling rather than Energuide because of the type of building, but they're not formally registering it. In the end, the differences are cost register, and lack of oversight. So when a project is registered, a certain number of those are audited. Also, when a project is registered, you get a nice decal at the end.
Yeah.
They don't want the decal?
Whereas
decal in this building, that cost, I don't know how much that decal costs, but quite a bit.
no comment.
Yeah. And just so the daycare building, if I recall, was shadow leased, wasn't it?
So
Yeah. So same thing, it's built to the lease certain standard, I think silver or whatever, and we don't get a decal for that building, but it's all the high points.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had a question or two. Around the tunnel, the tunnel would only be permissible if it could be satisfactorily built above the groundwater flood level.
mhm.
So surely the developer knows what the groundwater flood level is
Mhm.
in Spring Creek, since apparently the underground parkade floods every year. Or not every year, maybe. So how is it that it's suggested in a tentative way, either a tunnel will fit or it won't. So what's happening with this?
I apologize. I wasn't particularly clear. A tunnel, much like a basement, let's say a basement in TP Town, may not be a full basement. So some of it may be above ground, and then either buried with dirt or sticking up. I was going to say the alternative is it's conceivable for a tunnel to be, or for a parkade to be below the groundwater flood elevation.
Mhm.
It's just a much more expensive proposition
Mhm.
to build.
Yeah.
But they are possible to build and not flood.
Right.
So there is the alternative of meeting the engineering standards in an alternative way.
Okay. And So the two notions, one, a tunnel and a bridge, are separate from each other, connecting different buildings. But, there were, I mean, if a tunnel would work from building A to building B, would the tunnel also work from across or underneath the street? No, I guess not if it has to extend. That'd be quite a speed bump, wouldn't it? Maybe we should suggest that. Okay, and you spoke to the potential reduction of MR dedication, and indicating that there's good opportunity to make up that possible loss within future development areas. Just one last question. Around the bike parking, one covered bike parking per 5 vehicle stalls suggested to be within the parkade. I'm just curious, would that parkade be easily accessible to everybody? You don't need a code to get into the parkade or anything?
In discussions with the applicant, that parking would be targeted towards employees. Employees are likely to have a key or a pass to the building.
Okay.
That's where so it's possible hotel guests could use it as well, but the intent is to have staff come down on their bicycles.
Okay, so it's not really directed at public cyclists.
Correct.
All those people that are riding around downtown and dying to ride their bike over to Spring Creek, they have nowhere to put their bike under cover, is that? Oh, maybe that'll change.
We did pitch the idea of a covered bike parking sort of accessory building. Didn't go very far. The parking stalls within the parkade are actually quite expensive to provide, but I believe the applicant thinks they'll work better operationally for the hotel itself.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Then I'll move the bylaw 2015-17 and amendment to bylaw 01-2003 of the Spring Creek Mountain Village Area Redevelopment Plan, and to bylaw 22-2010, the land use bylaw, be given first reading. And we schedule a public hearing for October the 13th at 6 p.m. Speaking to that motion, I'll support the proposed bylaw at first reading. Still not solid on the need to increase the height, but I'm happy to hear from the public in regards to that. I recall some of the significant public angst and pushback and concerns voiced when initial approvals were being given, and some assurance coming that the height would be adequate to build a 200-room property with conference center. But I'm hearing what you're saying, that I understand that its standards may have changed, and potential for fancier hotel and conference facility, and it would increase possibly the assessment value. So for now, I'm really quite interested in seeing what happens at the public hearing and then discussing after that. Anybody else speaking to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving then on to item G1. Oh, yeah, I guess. What are you doing, Frank? It's difficult. should we wait for the CAO now as well, or? Okay, so waste disposal long haul agreement, Mr. Como.
Good evening, Mayor Borman, members of council. So this item is to talk about the long-haul contract that we have currently. The recommendation is that council give administration permission to enter into a contract with the town of Banff consistent with the details that we're going to talk about this evening. So I wanted to maybe take a step back and just so that council is clear what this part of the system we're talking about. So we have our municipal waste collection vehicles. They go around town. They go to our new transfer station, and then they are placed in large brown transfer bins. And so the step we're talking about is the contents of those bins are placed into a long-haul trailer, this is an example here, and then taken to a landfill site for ultimate disposal. So that's the piece we're talking about right now. So a little bit of background. The current agreement we have right now was originally secured and orchestrated by the Regional Waste Commission a number of years ago, and it was provided services to the town of Banff, to the town of Canmore, and by extension also to the village of Lake Louise. And there was a 5-year, and then we've had a number of extensions, and so, and generally I would say, from what I hear from the operators, as the contractor we have in place right now has been provided us great service. They're very easy to work with, and so generally we don't have any concern with the contractor. And so when we came in the process of developing the 2016 budget, we had approached the commission and said, find out what the next rates will be, because 2015 was, the end of 2015 was when it was going to expire. So the CAO for the commission had come back after he had approached the contractor, and they've given us pricing for 2016 and 2017 if we're interested in going that way. Now, the interesting thing is, around the same time, the town of Banff saw this as an opportunity, because it was non-committal, that they would investigate the option of bringing that service in-house and see how they would compete with this particular service. And so they had done some groundwork, investigated those options, and felt that they had a reasonable business case to pursue that. And back in July, they had approached their council and said, we would like to go in this direction, and their council said yes. And they'd also built into their models they had presented to the council the ability to extend it so that they could provide, by extension, the same service to the town of Canmore. So they'd approached us and said, are you guys interested? We'd like to extend this contract, or these pricings to you. So we sat down, we walked through the details. Generally, all the insurance stuff, all of that is very, very similar. What I have identified here are the key highlights. So because the current contract is set to expire at the end of this year, the new one would begin the next day. That's the fee provided by the town of Banff, and we'll go through what that means. Fuel charges, again, and that's pretty common. They would have to demonstrate that, yes, the price of diesel has gone up or down, and the adjustments would mirror the city, basically the adjustments that CPI that we recognize each year when we go through the budget process. And the term would be a 5-year term with the ability for a 5-year extension. So ultimately, it could be 10 years. The 5-year extension would be conditional on both parties agreeable to that. And the part that we like, which is why we're not interested, i.e. the town of Canmore, in pursuing this, is that we feel that there's risk in providing this service, this business. You have trucks on the road all months of the year. Conditions can be quite challenging. We have challenges with staffing, people coming and going. You need a special license to drive this vehicle. It's a Class 1. And so we just felt that we're not interested, but if the town is interested in taking on that risk, then that's wonderful, especially if they're going to extend that to us. So the risk for the equipment and staffing is not shared by the town of Canmore with the town of Banff. So when we jump over to the impact, what I wanted to go through here is when we had approached the hauler to say, hey, what would you, how much would it cost? They had come back to us. So these $79 and $84 and so on are the existing prices, and we broke it down in two parts. The $35 is the set fee. They were able to extend those fees into the near future, up to 2017 with the current landfill site. And so really what the hauler has control over is the hauling fee, and they just combine that and pass it on to the customer. So he had come back to us when we had approached him. The CAO had approached him about what the cost would be going forward, and he'd increased the rates by equivalent to about 1.3% when you combine the two. And then he'd also given us a 2017 rate, which was in a similar area. So not a significant increase. And so, sorry, is there a
Question from Councillor Crott?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a clarification. This is if Banff was still in the agreement though, right?
That's right, yeah. And so I was going to go there, that, you know, this was back in the spring because, or late spring, because we generally start thinking about our budget process at the time, what our costs going to be. So this was the price they gave us on the assumption that the town of Banff and the village of Lake Louise would continue to be in the contract.
And so since Banff and Lake Louise are going their own direction, this isn't even an option available to us?
No.
Okay.
No, exactly. Well, and it gets more interesting than that, Councillor Crosser, which
I just wanted to make sure that...
And, you know, and the fact that you asked that question, I think, it raises an interesting point, is that, you know, if we had, you know, I really applaud the town of Banff in this scenario, is if we had accepted these prices and said, okay, that's what they are, and then we go build budgets around that, this is what we'd be paying right now, right? Depending on the decision council makes this evening. However, you know, the municipality said, you know what, let's take a look at this. Maybe we can deliver this more cost effectively in-house. And that has sparked a number of adjustments, or potential adjustments to the fee that benefits the customers. And so by simply going through that exercise, asking that key question, hey, can we do this better in-house? Can we make it less expensive? I think has been a fantastic exercise. And we'll likely see more of that, because I think there is opportunity for other services too, because typically as a municipality we have a number of in-house services that we are challenged on. Are we delivering them effectively? And, you know, how does this compare to private? And there may be an opportunity to flip the discussion. So with that, and I think what I wanted to just make sure it's clear to members of council is the $120, because a lot of the calculations are based on that, because that is before we ask the question, can we do it less expensive? So then this is the town of Banff's comparison, and you can see that they've come in at basically $75, and then you add the $35, they've been able to get the same fee from the same landfill site, so you look at $109, just short of $10 difference, or 8% minus 8%, which works out to about, you can see, $28,000 decrease over 2015. So that's a number that's not in your report, and that's a number that goes from 119 to 109, what the cost savings are. The 33,000 that's in the report is comparing the 2016 numbers, the 120 versus the 109. So I just wanted to make that special distinction. And then we just made an assumption for 2017 of 2%. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting, is as I said, we had a price from the current contractor, and now we had a price from Banff, and we felt, all right, let's evaluate those. But yesterday, unfortunately, after the staff report was completed and submitted, the current hauler contacted the CAO for the commission and had given another price. So we're going to just share that with council tonight. So they had gone from roughly $85 to $80. Again, there's that $35 landfill fee, so it brings it down to $115, which is still a drop of minus 3.5%, or $12,000 over the year before. So again, because we asked that question, because we were exploring that, we, the town of Canmore and the town of Banff, stand to gain as the ratepayers, because we don't have to, our expenses are not going to be as high. And so that was, I just wanted to highlight that as well, because we just got that information yesterday, but I think it was prudent to share that with council. and you can see that the difference there is about $12,000. The other one that they had thrown out there, and again, it was just in an email to us, it was not to me, but again, shared to me by the CAO, was another option to send it down to Pincher Creek. And since we know this landfill, and this is where we've been taking it, and this is where they've been taking it, this is the price that I shared with council. The one to Pincher Creek is a little bit less, but there's some unknowns about that, what the landfill fee would be. If you go on their website and you take a look at their fees, it's actually more in line with the town of Banff fee, but still slightly more expensive. So the other thing I wanted to share, when we look at all of that, and again, this is where I wanted to show that 33,000, make that distinction with $120 a ton. If we look at status quo, again, if we hadn't asked that question, this is what it would cost us, the $362,000. With the revised, taking it to the same location, the value I got yesterday, which is fantastic because it still brought it down. We sharpened the pencil, is a reduction of $17,000. But then going with the town of Banff, it's an overall reduction in what we had originally estimated to pay, over $33,000 in utilities. And for your benefit, the utility itself right now, we have it broken out on the waste and recycling budget. And so just on the waste side, 1% gets us about $15,000. A 1% increase. That's how much money it generates for the utility. So you can see here, there's roughly over a % reduction and roughly a 2% reduction if we went with the town of Banff. And for your benefit, the 1% equates to about $2 a year per account. So it's not a significant amount, but it does add up. So with that, I have the motion back up and can answer any questions if there are.
Thanks for the report. It's been, a long time coming in some ways. I'm glad it's here and we have some certainty on the proposal from the town of Banff. And I just want to be certain that I'm hearing that there is certainty that Banff has landfill access and there's no worry that may not
Yes,
happen?
they have confirmed to us that that $35 a ton at the West Dried Meat landfill site will be extended to the town of Banff.
So in the future, town of Banff would have similar possible concerns about the landfill, having to find a different landfill as the current hauler has? I mean, that's always been a concern I've heard.
I don't think they're protected any more than any other jurisdiction or body. Yeah.
And we seem to be quite protected with the proposed contract in the eventuality, in the unlikely event that the town of Banff, their planning proves to have fallen short in some way and they're surprised by their actual costs being higher than anticipated. We're covered, at least through the 5-year contract.
Yeah, the agreement has the fee schedule, and so that's all we're responsible for. And Mr. Mayor, one thing I did forget to mention is that there is the likelihood that Banff has placed the order for the trailer to support the town of Canmore. It may not be delivered by the 1st, and under those circumstances, as I said, the current contractor has been very reasonable to deal with and is willing to allow us to continue using their service until that replacement trailer is in place.
So is there a window or a timeline on that offer from the current hauler? I mean, say it took a year to get things in place for town of Banff.
The original one, it was for a 2-year term, and I think we could lock in. If they're in a position right now where it appears to be pretty interested in this work. Hence the follow-up email yesterday, sharpening their pencil furthermore. And so I believe if we chose to go that route, that option is still very much there, and it would be for a 2-year period.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Russell.
Thank you for your presentation. First question, you said Pincher Creek is a little bit less of a rate. Could you tell council what the rate is for Pincher Creek?
From what I can gather, the rate They have a regional and a non-regional, so we would be non-regional and it's 56, 62 a ton.
Versus 80.
No, versus
80
35.
versus 80 at the dry meat.
No, versus 35,
Okay.
you're right.
Yeah.
So it ends up being, like as I said, it's pretty close. It's like $1 a ton to get to Pincher Creek. Unfortunately, we weren't aware of that option when we'd asked until yesterday. It would have been nice to know that when we'd asked for these pricing back in June.
Another question, if I could?
Mhm.
Has this BAMP proposal ever been taken out to the commission for review? Or is this like, considering the commission's been delivering that service for some time, and it's, BAMP is brand new in the trucking business, did you ever review this with the commission at all? With the CAO or the board or anything?
You know what, I'm not aware. I don't know if they have.
No, did you review it as prior to Town of Canmore's?
Did we, the town of...
Yeah. I'm asking, did the Town of Canmore take the BAMP proposal out and say, what do you think, is this a good proposal or not?
Oh, no, we did not. No.
Okay. One more?
You bet.
This is about a $300,000 contract.
Yeah.
How does this fit? Are we not in violation of our sole sourcing agreement to go out and to offer a $300,000 contract sole source?
Well, and that's why we're here tonight, because normally we would be going out to tender. And the time we've done that is when we originally secured this contract, was going out through a tender process.
But here you're asking us to tell you to go ahead and do a contract, but we don't know if it's going to violate policy. And similarly, what about our interprovincial agreements? Like, are we responsible for? I may be off on my understanding of this, but the TILMA, that's whatever the new version of that is, over a certain amount of money, are we not required to bid that competitively? Like that legislation over and above town policy.
No, I'm not aware.
Mr. Soto?
That's an interesting question, Councillor Russell, and I would have to think about that for a minute, but I was going to respond to your other question regarding our purchasing policy. So, and just to expand on Mr. Como's response, is that yes, in fact, our purchasing policy would require us to go out to competitive bid on this, and it's for the reason that we're not going out to competitive bid that we're here seeking council's approval of that. And council has the authority to go outside of your purchasing policy. So that is part of the purchasing policy. If we're not following the purchasing policy, we need to have council approval of that to proceed in this way. The Municipal Government Act certainly allows us to enter into municipal joint municipal agreements for efficiencies of service. So, anything that we do, for example, the biosolids hauling that was not tendered, or, entering into the commission itself for efficiencies is not something that would violate the TILMA agreement. So I think we're well within our rights to partner with another neighboring municipality to deliver efficient service.
Last question. Appreciate what you said, that BAMP is going to pick up the risk on the staffing and the equipment, but this is a brand new function that Town of BAMP really hasn't been in the business of doing before. What about the risk of, can they deliver? They're going into this with one trailer at this point, waiting for one delivery. The lifespan on that stuff isn't that good.
Well, they have their own. They're purchasing multiple trailers, and they have designed their model because I think they received similar questions from their council to the so they had enough comfort to go ahead with this, because even us removed from it, it actually exposes the town of Banff at risk that if they don't have enough redundancy both in staffing and equipment, then they can't move their waste, and then they end up having quite a bit of problems. So their model is intended to deal with redundancy so that if there are staffing or equipment, there's another trailer sitting there, or it can be cycled in to deal with it if something unforeseen happens.
Since they're hauling on this commercial basis, does the town of Banff own operating authority to do that haul? Provincial trucking requires that they're selling the service to other municipalities. Are they not required by provincial regulation to have operating authority, which allows them to run a trucking business on the highway? I mean, that's a complex process, that the whole concept of operating authorities, it regulates cargo and different hauls around the province, and we would, before we can think about tackling an agreement, if they've got no operating authority, they can't operate.
I'm not aware of a reason why they wouldn't be able to operate commercially. As long as they meet, the CVIP requirements, the operators have their license, they obey the rules of the road. There is a document required called operating authority. It's their right granted by the Motor Transport Board for them to conduct a commercial haul in the province. They would have to have that before they could even start this process, because they wouldn't be legal to
Just
run.
to that concern, Councillor Russell, if that should prove out to be the case, then I would assume the agreement from the current contractor to take on the continued delivery of service would kick in the same way as noted in the report. If Banff can't have the new trailers delivered in time, I would interpret that as saying, or other unforeseen glitch, then we have Plan B as a fallback. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Right.
And so we could stay in the fallback position until these issues, if they are issues, are addressed.
I'm just afraid if we drag that out, the point for asking it is, as we drag this longer and longer, this guy from boot trucking might find something else to do with his truck, and we could be out of luck because we did everything on his contract.
Fair enough.
If I can just answer that question, though, just so Councillor Russell's more comfortable, is we've already spoken to them about our ability, there may be some challenges in January, February. So at this point, a number of months out, they have committed to us that they would be there to provide that service in the interim.
Councillor Crowther?
My question goes to what I was asking earlier. I'm just trying to understand what our current situation is. If Banff has decided that they're going to haul themselves, so they're no longer part of the current contract, does that not put us into a situation that what we're really comparing with is either going with Banff or going with this scenario 3, where it's that you have in your report on page 3, which is the higher transfer fees?
And again, this is where things have become very convoluted, is when Banff had made it official that they were going to go out on a loan, we had said, okay, well, what is it going to cost the town of Canmore to stay within the contract? So scenario 3 is what they had provided us.
Right.
However, since then, up to yesterday, they have given us a different
So that
rate.
revised one is even with Banff out?
That's right. It's
okay.
just us alone.
So that's what I wanted to get to.
Those
is
are
what
the two things
what we're really comparing with. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. That's really sharpening their pencil. Then.
Yes, it is.
From the 105 to the 80. Thank you.
And Councillor Seeley has a question, but I just want to be certain that I'm understanding this correctly, which I think I am. Town of Banff is committed to moving forward with or without Town of Canmore's involvement.
Correct.
Right.
And they've extended to the village of Lake Louise, and they've accepted, so it'll be the two of them.
Great. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Como, getting back to the commencement date of January 1st, there's some question about having the trailers on time. And when I read further, it talks about some adjustments in pricing. Can you go through that scenario? What the reasonable expectation of having the trailers are? And are we going to be paying an additional $5,000 if this is delayed?
And again, my apologies for all the numbers that we're sharing. with council tonight. So, again, those were numbers that they had provided us. They had given us two scenarios for us to go it alone initially. And so one of them was that additional $20 a ton, which was what Councillor Krauser just referred to. The other was, if there was the ability to be able to store an excavator, a hoe on site, so that they could pack the waste before it left the facility so they could get more in there, then there would be no extra charge. It would be the same as the one they had given us back in June. Now, we've had a chance to have the contractor come out and take a look, and there's the ability to do it effectively not costing anything for them to pack on site. So the number we should really be looking at is not the one with the $20 surcharge.
Councillor Krauser.
Your Worship, I just had one other question that occurred to me, and I don't know if this is best answered by yourself or by our representatives on the Waste Management Commission. I'm just wondering, what, if any, impact would this decision have on the Waste Management Commission? I haven't sat on that commission, so I'm really unaware.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is the contract's a flow through. The commission handles it, so if anything, the commission would pick up a little bit of time spent on administering the contract. There is no tangible dollar draw.
Thank you.
Are there other questions at this time from members of council? Seeing none. Thank you very much. With that, I'll move the council direct administration to enter into a municipal solid waste long-haul trucking agreement with the town of Banff, effective January 1st, 2016, under the condition that the financial terms of the agreement are consistent with those presented today. Speaking to that motion, I recognize that inherent in this decision is the approval of council to sole source this service, which is required by administration to move forward in this manner. Also, quite happy to support the motion. Once again, it speaks to a regional collaborative sort of approach to dealing with shared responsibilities here in the Bow Valley, even though it continues to be the waste trucked outside of the Bow Valley. It's the town of Banff, town of Canmore working together to find solutions that are better for our taxpayers. And it appears as though it's considerable savings on over the current hauler's contract. So, for all of those reasons, I'm happy to support the motion. Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll also support the motion. We do have to take seriously when we sole source. I do think that has been taken seriously, and I really wanted to add my voice to the appreciation to the administration to ask the questions and to see if there's better ways that we can do the service, provide the services that we provide to the taxpayers.
Further discussion on the motion? Councillor Russell.
Worship, I'm not comfortable with this motion on a number of levels, as we've voiced already. I won't repeat them all and take up more time. There are a bunch of ambiguities that need to be asked. We're competing with private industry. I'm not sure we should be going into competing with private industry when the costs are, the savings are minimal. I'd like a better answer on the Tilma. I'm not sure with that one, and without being disrespectful to what we're getting, I think we need to take a good look. Sole sourcing, we've talked about. Trucking, this is a new trucking business. Ultimately, Town of Banff is opening a new trucking company. They don't, the question of operating authority is just, I apologize because it's something from a previous life, but, there's just some ambiguities here, and what I'm concerned with is, I can live with the rest of that because I'm sure it'll come back, but as long as this motion says that as long as the financial terms are consistent, I think I'd like to see the contract coming back before it's entered into. So for that reason, I'm not comfortable supporting this as is.
So that wasn't an amending motion? It is an amending motion. Okay. And if we focus and zoom in, new gizmo here, it'll take us a little while. Oop. There we go. Yeah, darn near perfect. No. Okay, good enough. Whoa. Oh, okay. Woo. So, speaking to your amending motion then, Councillor? Okay, is there a discussion to the amending motion? Councillor Crowther?
Thank you, Your Worship. So if I'm understanding this correctly, then we would be authorizing the that administration go ahead with negotiating and creating this agreement, and that it would come back to us for final approval. And so my follow-up question to that is to administration, what sort of timing are we looking at, and do you have any concerns with how that might influence your ability to negotiate the agreement?
Mr. Como?
The only, so the town of Banff is waiting for council's decision, and so once they've done that, they haven't ordered the trailer yet, because there's no commitment. And so if we don't have a full agreement, like this recommendation, then they will possibly hold off on ordering that trailer until the town of Banff, the town of Canmore has had an opportunity to finalize the full agreement, prepare the staff report, bring it back to council for final approval. So that's 6 weeks plus, or I have no idea. And so that will delay the contract by the same time period.
So this could delay the start of the contract by a month and a half or 2 months?
Yes.
Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Well, I can see Councillor Russell's concern about the sole source contract and about discussing further with the regulatory requirements, but it seems to me that bringing a contract back to council is very operational, and I it seems like that's a very big step for council to take to actually review the contract. So I think the wording as it exists in the original motion is better, from my perspective, to address the intent of the decision, because I don't know that the contract is something that we need to look at specifically. So I won't support this motion.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. So a question to Councillor Russell through the chair, please. I'm just curious, Councillor Russell, if you can explain to me how bringing the contract back to council for approval will assuage your concerns with regards to provincial trucking requirements as well as our TIMLA requirements.
Well, I'd like to see that we've done our diligence, that it's all done. I'm not hearing anything that makes me confident in what I've heard.
Are those normally items that are addressed in a contract?
I would suggest they are. If the regulatory requirements aren't met, you shouldn't be offering contracted service.
But would that be something, Mr. Como just commented that those are not items that you would normally find in a trucking contract. That contract wouldn't necessarily address your concerns with regards to TIMLA or with regards to the provincial trucking requirements. I guess I'm just trying to understand how those are your two biggest concerns from your questions and from your statements. I'm trying to draw a line between the two, and the line's pretty squiggly.
Yeah, I would, jumping in on this little debate, I would argue that signing a contract would imply that the contractor has all of the necessary permits and approvals in place, otherwise they couldn't sign a contract, and that would be my feeling on the matter.
Well, so based on that, if those are two items, the two biggest items that Councillor Russell brought up as a concern on having the contract brought back to council for approval, if those items aren't going to be addressed in the contract, then I don't understand why would you bring it back to council for approval, so I won't be able to support your amendment, Councillor Russell. I'm sorry. And
for similar reasons, I won't be able to support the amending motion. I appreciate Councillor Russell's different perspective, or more informed perspective, I suppose, but it seems to me that all the contract does is bring back the financial terms that we've agreed to here. That's the essence of the motion as the main motion, so I don't see any benefit in asking to have the contract brought back. Mr. Park, did you have a comment on this matter?
If I may, Mr. Mayor. So Councillor Russell has raised some legitimate concerns around whether or not Banff is able to execute the contract. That is certainly something that administration can commit to clarifying. We have not executed the contract yet. We're waiting for council to approve that. Certainly, as part of our due diligence with the contract, once we receive it, we can also look into these aspects. And, if for whatever reason we are not able to enter the contract, either because it's not consistent with the regulation, or Banff does not have the requisite permissions, then that's something that we can consider and bring back to council. So I think we can address Councillor Russell's concerns without having the requirement to bring this back to council.
Is there further discussion on the amending motion? Councillor Russell?
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mr. Park. Thanks very much for that thought. I guess I remain concerned when I read through the documentation that, Town of Banff is going to go this on their own, but they haven't ordered a trailer yet because they're waiting to hear what we've got to say. Then when I voiced something that is a fairly common practice fairly common term in trucking, as Mr. Causey could testify to, I'm not getting a confident answer. So
my understanding, Councillor Russell, is that what Town of Banff is waiting for in regards to purchase is whether or not they need additional equipment to service the Town of Canmore. I understand that the Town of Banff Council has approved purchase of the trailers that they require for their own municipal service. So that, they're not gonna purchase another trailer unless the town of Banff is in. That's how I understand it.
I guess I understand it differently, but thank you.
I'm pretty sure my understanding is correct. But, to the amending motion then, that's on the overhead, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Shall I try that again?
Yeah.
Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is opposed, defeated with Councillor Russell in support. Back to the main motion then. Direct administration to enter into a municipal solid waste long-haul trucking agreement with the town of Banff, effective January 1st, 2016, under the condition that the financial terms of the agreement are consistent with those presented today. Councillor Krausert?
Thank you, Your Worship. So I was going to suggest an amendment that would hopefully satisfy Councillor Russell's concerns, but I think that Mr. Fark's undertaking by administration will probably satisfy it. So I just wanted to clarify that in following this direction, if passed, that administration would undertake the necessary due diligence to make sure that the town of Banff has satisfied all regulatory requirements and the Tilma agreement is looked at to determine if it comes into play or not. So is that my understanding is what administration would do? That's fine. I don't need to provide an amendment to that, and I'm happy still to support this motion.
Okay, so then on the main motion, I'll call the question. Those in support? Opposed? Motion's carried with Councillor Russell in opposition. Moving on now to item G2. The Asset and Risk Management Coordinator position, Mr. Fark.
So good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. I am here before you this evening. The municipal clerk is going to put the motion before you in just a second here. But I'm here before you seeking approval for the creation of an FTE within the finance department for the purpose of implementing town-wide asset and risk management, and that council approve the allocation of up to $30,000 from capital project 1501 to fund the position for the balance of 2015. So that's the motion that we'll see in a moment. I can probably bring it up here. Okay. So that's the motion that I will be speaking to. I'd like to start with some background. So starting in 2009, the Public Sector Accounting Board began requiring local governments to recognize capital expenditures, capital assets, to amortize or depreciate them over time, and to include this information in their summary financial statements. So that initiative by the Public Sector Accounting Board has had consequences across municipalities across the country in terms of essentially what they're calling tangible capital asset and tangible capital asset reporting. Currently, the town of Canmore has over $70 million in building assets and hundreds of millions in infrastructure assets that are required to maintain, that we are required to maintain and report on annually. And the motion is there, so I'd like to
Okay.
Perfect. So just to give council an idea, this is a list of some of the infrastructure that has been brought on by the town just in the last 5 years. And as you can see, there's close to $70 million in new infrastructure that the town has brought on in a very short time frame. Some of this infrastructure is quite significant. Elevation Place, some of the flood mitigation infrastructure, the MRF, the recycling facility, Arts Place, etc. So these are all very large infrastructure projects that not only had an initial capital cost, but are going to have a long-term operating, maintenance, replacement, and repair cost. So just to give you a sense of the scale of the infrastructure assets that the town is dealing with, this is just the last 5 years. It doesn't include any of the road infrastructure, utility infrastructure, etc. This is simply new assets in the last 5 years. So to this point, the town needs a full understanding of the complete cost to build, maintain, and eventually replace existing and future infrastructure for informed budget prioritization and long-term financial planning. In addition, we have the requirement to do the tangible capital asset reporting to the government every year. There are a couple of other recent developments that are interesting. One is that the Federal Gas Tax Fund program, as of this year, now requires local governments to have asset management plans and programs in place in order to qualify for funding. And the provincial government has committed to implementing asset management requirements for municipalities by the end of 2015. So the regulatory environment around asset management is changing, and that is because the higher levels of government are recognizing the importance of ensuring that municipalities are doing a proper job of asset management. In terms of prior council direction on this issue, in 2010, council approved a budget to procure an asset management software program for the town. That program was initiated in 2011. And in 2015, council approved for 2015, so in 2014, council approved the town 2015 budget and business plan, which included Capital Project 1501, which was an asset management program. So in terms of discussion, the implementation of the town asset management software, which was called WorkTech, began in 2011. Unfortunately, despite being 4 years into the process, we are currently not close to full implementation of that program. The program has been implemented in a somewhat decentralized fashion across different departments. We've had turnover of key staff and a number of unexpected events like the flood, the Civic Center flood, etc., that has resulted in a deprioritization. And so what we're getting is various levels of implementation across departments, and that is resulting in a different approach to how the implementation is being done, and therefore different results in terms of reporting and the information we're getting out of it. Importantly, the program is not currently being used to effectively track changes that we're making to our existing assets or engage in long-term asset lifecycle planning. So the long and the short of it is we've been invested in this program. We haven't been able to implement it fully, and as a result of that, we're not using it to its full potential, and we're not getting the benefit, or we're not deriving the benefit from the program. There are some other issues to be considered, one of which is duplication. So currently, as I mentioned, we have the tangible capital asset reporting requirement. The finance department, including into 2015, has maintained a parallel Excel sheet to track tangible capital assets and to report on them, when that information should be generated automatically in the WorkTech software program and generated in a way that can meet the reporting requirements. So there's a duplication of effort that is currently ongoing. Similarly, in the municipal clerk's office, they coordinate yearly an update to our asset insurance schedule, and that is a schedule that we use to determine the premiums and deductibles of our insurance for our assets. That is, again, something that is being done as a duplication, because that is something that a proper asset management program, including the implementation of WorkTech, would generate automatically and would allow us to generate without having to do it in parallel. Finally, successful implementation of a asset management program is essential to our records management. And I believe that Council has heard recently about some of the challenges we face in terms of record management. Up to 70% of municipal records are asset records. And in order to ensure regulatory compliance and a proper tracking of our assets, we need to record them properly. The proper implementation of the asset management program would allow us to meet our reporting requirements and our records management requirements. So, where does that leave us now? We've invested in a program, we're not fully utilizing it, we have some duplication and some inefficiencies that could be addressed. Where do we want to get to? So, a fully implemented asset management program would have a common organization-wide asset management system that provides functionality and information for town departments that manage their assets. It would allow us to do long-term financial planning. It would allow us to do long-term life cycle planning of assets. It would allow us to ensure that we are properly insuring our assets and help along, essentially, avoid some current duplication or eliminate some current duplication. So why does this project require a dedicated FTE, I guess is the main question. So over the last 4 years, the attempt has been made to implement the asset management program side of desk. It has been led by the manager of IT. He's made a very noble effort, but with other priorities within his department and across the corporation, he hasn't had the time to dedicate to pushing this forward. More to the point, it is not his area of expertise. Asset management is not a program that reaches a completion stage and then is in place and functions on its own. It's like many other things. It needs to be sustained over time. You need a dedicated person or a dedicated resource that is a corporate service that manages the town-wide effort to ensure that we're doing our proper maintenance of our assets, our proper recording of that maintenance of our assets, and then using that information in a way that can inform our life cycle planning and our financial planning and our insurance planning. So that is something that requires an ongoing effort to maintain. It's not something that ever reaches a final completion. So for that reason, we're requesting the creation of an asset management position that will manage both the asset and the risk management aspects for the town on an ongoing basis. It will ensure compliance town-wide and tangible capital asset reporting. In terms of alternatives to approving the position now, Council could request that we delay and we include this position in part of the 2016 budget. The reason why we are not recommending that is because given the lag time for recruitment, by the time we would start recruitment in the new year, it would take us 3 or 4 months to get somebody likely in place. They are late, therefore, into the planning process for 2016 in order to contribute meaningfully into the 2017 budget cycle and planning cycle going forward. So this is really about ensuring that we don't lose time. We are engaging with finance in a process of long-term financial planning. The government, the expectation is that the MGA will start to require 3-year financial planning starting in 2017. So in order for us to be positioned and have the proper information in place, in order to do that effectively, it makes sense to try to conserve as much time as we can. In terms of 2015 budget, there is not a serious implication. The Project 1501 has funds remaining in it. That project was for the implementation of the WorkTech software program, so we are requesting permission for Council to allocate the balance of those funds up to $30,000 if required in order to fund this position for the balance of 2015. The second alternative is that we could decide not to create an FTE. We could do a professional services contract from WorkTech or a similar company to help us complete the implementation of the software. So that would advance the software implementation and the implementation of the operational use of it. So that's helping the operators actually have mobile devices that they can use to track the work that they were doing, make sure that the work orders are being properly tracked, the updates to the assets are probably done, and that each department is, as much as possible, inputting their data to to a reasonable level. But that only addresses the front-end operational side of it. It does not look at the asset, the TCA reporting. It does not look at actually using that data in a meaningful way to inform decision-making, either for life cycle planning or for financial planning, and it does not in any way address the risk management side of things, so the insurance efficiency. So it would be money that we would spend on a contractor to help us do some functionality aspects, but it is not money that we would be spending then to create capacity and use information effectively within the town. In terms of the financial implications, as I mentioned for 2015, this would be covered with an existing approved budget. Beyond that, the impact would be approximately $100,000 per year for the FTE, that salary and benefits. However, I'd like to point out that there are some real financial benefits to moving forward with this. Taking aside the issue of the duplication that we would be eliminating and being more effective within the services that we're providing from the town's perspective, every time we defer life cycle maintenance, there's a cost associated with that. So we've seen that with the rec center, for example. By deferring the maintenance, the actual cost of the maintenance doesn't just get put off by a number of years, the cost actually increases. So by not doing proper life cycle maintenance planning, we are incurring additional costs, and we're incurring those costs down the road. So part of the aim of this program is to ensure that we're doing a more effective life cycle planning for assets. Similarly, with financial planning, it's the same situation. How we manage our debt load, how we manage other ways of financing these projects will be better informed when we have a proper life cycle analysis and asset management analysis in place. Finally, as we saw with the fire hall, which was a rather expensive experience, we realized that we were underinsured on one of our key assets. And that resulted in the town having to cover the additional cost that the insurance did not provide. So by introducing a proper risk management program, we, in effect, are hoping to eliminate that future risk, or at least significantly reduce that future risk of being underinsured. And there are other potential efficiencies there. We can look at the deductibles that we're paying on various assets and determine whether or not they are appropriate, and adjustments we can make to those deductibles to optimize our ratio between the premium that we're paying and the coverage that we have. So those are some potential financial positive benefits in addition to the costs. At that, I will open it up to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fark. I'm getting a really clear sense that this recommendation might be coming forward from administration regardless of the changing reporting requirements around tangible capital assets that the provincial government's bringing in. I mean, clearly you're describing great value that exists in the town with this kind of position and management outside of our growing requirement to report, and certainly.
That's absolutely correct, yes.
And to be clear, an observation for council, this effectively will add $100,000 to our operating budget for 2016
and beyond, yes.
Which is approximately 0.5% of tax. So this decision has that long-term impact. One other question I have, and it's, take it for what it is. When you were speaking, what I was starting to hear was really a description of, we've had discussions recently about council's obligation to maintain an oversight on the operations of the town. This feels to me like one form of oversight that's going to become much more robust. Do you think that's fair characterization?
Absolutely. Every department has assets and has a responsibility to maintain those assets in a responsible way. However, in most of the departments, they don't have asset management experience or expertise. So this is the reason for having this as a corporate service, housing finance, as a support department to ensure that across departments we're managing our assets appropriately.
Thank you. Councillor Comfort.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Burke. I guess my question is, I remember this program being described to us previously when it was proposed, and we had such high hopes for it, and it's sad to know that it's been so slow to be implemented. I think it could certainly make finance's job a lot easier, I'm thinking, and council's job in terms of planning for budget and so forth make a lot more sense, and hopefully have fewer gaps like on the fire hall insurance and on the old rec center, and not being able to put that into some kind of life cycle that made sense. So while it is gonna have tax implications, I feel that it's really necessary. I do have a question though. It seems that there might be another position attached to this one in some kind of administrative or support position.
There will actually be a number of positions that this position will be working with. So each department, with one or two exceptions currently, has a asset management person who has been identified as a key focal point within that department. Some of them, in the case of Public Works, they actually have a dedicated FTE currently that is trying to work on the implementation of WorkTech within the department. In facilities, we have a resource that has had additional work added to their position to support this program. So, yes, absolutely correct. They'll be working within the finance department to support identified resources in all of the other departments to ensure that the resources move forward. They will need support, admin support to some extent from within finance. And there's been some discussion within the municipal clerk's office around how do we organize the insurance claims aspect as opposed to the insurance efficiency aspect. So yes, there are going to be resource allocation implications throughout the organization with this.
Okay. And also, well, actually, no, that's good. Thanks.
But that question in your answer doesn't suggest that before we know it, there'll be a request for an additional half-time FTA to support this role?
It's not envisioned currently. However, it is important to note that within Public Works, in 2015, as part of Budget 1501, we capitalized the WorkTech project. Part of that included a term position within Public Works to support the implementation of WorkTech within Public Works. In 2016, we're proposing to operationalize that rather than capitalize it. Because again, it's a big department with a lot of assets. This is something that's going to require ongoing support. But that's specific within the Public Works budget, and it's something that is currently in place now, but capitalized rather than operationalized.
So that expense will be jumping over to the operating budget?
That's correct, and that will come forward in the 2016 budget. But there will be no request in the short term for an admin support specifically to support this position.
Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Fark. I find myself being quite convinced by the rationale for the position, but having two concerns with the ask. And so I want to ask a couple questions around that. First, my smaller concern, because it is money that's already allocated, and we're just taking it from a capital project if we approved it, putting it operating, and that's the amount for this year. But it doesn't make sense in with respect to your report where it indicates that it's going to take 3 to 4 months to resource the person, to recruit them. So why do we need money in the 2015
So
timeframe?
it can take up to 3 to 4 months. Optimistically, if we get council's approval today, we would move to advertise. We've already created the position profile. We would move to advertise as quickly as possible. Our experience with recruitment in the town is that for these types of skilled positions, it is difficult to find somebody in place quickly and get them in place quickly. It's why we've requested the allocation of up to $30,000 from the capital project budget. So, optimistically, we could have somebody in place by November. In which case, we want to make sure that we are able to have budget assigned to cover those costs for the balance of the year. If, however, it takes longer, then that capital budget money would not be applied for that purpose. So, but I can't request the FTE be approved in this year without having some source of funding to cover the cost of the position should we be successful in recruiting quickly.
So if we get lucky you'd have the money, and you wouldn't want to have be approved with a January 1st start date?
Well, ideally, if we have somebody in place, if you go through the recruitment process and we have a successful candidate, we'd like to get them in place as quickly as possible.
Okay, so that's my smaller concern. My larger concern is, could you speak to the 3 or 4 months that we may gain-ish of having this person in place that justifies going outside of our regular budget process? Because, of course, what this essentially does is circumvent the regular budget process and adds $100,000 in when it's not being weighed against the other asks in the overall picture.
That is absolutely correct. That is what we're doing, is we're trying to expedite this and not including that. So this will feature in the 2016 budget. Again, the reason for attempting to expedite this. So we're mid-September now. If we have to wait until the budget for 2016 is approved, that usually takes place in mid-December. You're looking at a start of recruitment, best case scenario of sort of mid-January. And then we're talking about 3 or 4 months of time to recruit the individual to get a successful candidate in place. Then we need to do the onboarding. They need to move forward with the technical aspect of implementing the WorkTech software. So we're unlikely to really produce much in the way of usable additional data from the asset management program for the 2017 budget process in that scenario, because the person's not going to have time to be clearly established and in place. So I guess my point would be this. If the rationale and the argument makes sense, and we agree that this is a requirement for the town, then the time we gain by having somebody in place, preferably before the end of the year, means that they have time to ramp up the implementation of the program early in the new year, and we actually have a reasonably good prospect of being able to make use of that information for the long-term financial planning process that we're going to have to start in the middle of 2016. Then what we're gaining is time, but we're not really losing anything in terms of cost or budget. What we are doing is not putting in context of the rest of the ask. That is clear. I don't really have an answer to that. It's my opinion, if I was asked, would be that even taking the rest of the ask for 2016 into consideration, this is a priority position.
Mm-hmm. So I guess my follow-up to that would be, how confident are we that this person would be able to get up to speed if they were hired? I mean, they're likely, even if the recruitment started now, they're not likely to start until January 1, let's say. That's 3.5 months from now, and it will take some time to get the process started, as you suggested. How confident are we that they would actually have an impact? Because it's a huge job. It's a necessary job. It needs to be done right. It involves all departments. And until it's all done, I would think you actually aren't able to make some really good decisions because you need to take a look at the whole in order to determine priorities, right? So how confident are you that it actually would make an impact for the budget process next year?
So there are a number of things that can be done or that would be done early on in the process. First of all, improving the quality of the reporting that we're currently doing and making sure that that's standardized across all departments prior to the 2016 budget cycle is important, right? So at this moment in time, we don't have that. Different departments are inputting information in different ways and therefore generating different types of reporting. So ensuring the standardization of the information we do have prior to the 2016 budget process would be important. Around this time every year, we do the insurance sufficiency as well. And so an asset schedule goes out and all the managers are asked to update that. But they don't really have the understanding or the expertise in order to be able to do that. So having that person in place essentially and up and running would allow them to have a significant contribution to that and ensure that that is done in a fulsome manner. So will they have the full and complete picture? No. That is something that can only be accomplished long-term and ongoing. But I would be concerned about, because of how our budget planning process works and our insurance planning process works, we're really looking at that time frame from sort of July through to November is the That's the key period for us. And if we delay the recruitment until into the new year, and by the time we get somebody up to speed, they're likely not to be sufficiently in place to provide added value for that cycle for 2016. So the reason for bringing this forward now is to give them the maximum potential to have that contribution there.
Thank you.
Just further to that question of Councillor Krauser, so I thought one of the things I was getting from your presentation was that it seems very likely that a position like this will be required in the near future, regardless of the decision tonight, as a result of changing provincial regulations on TCA reporting. I mean, if those regulations change as we understand they will, would we have the resources to meet the stronger regulations without this position?
Well, we are currently doing TCA reporting, and so we're meeting the current requirements. Would our current asset management program qualify, for example, for what the federal gas tax fund is looking for, as it exists currently? I mean, we could make an argument. I can't say that for sure. What is clear is that the requirements are going to be more robust the farther along that we go, year after year, as they go out. So it's difficult to answer that question.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Mr. Park, for your presentation. I did have a couple of questions for you. I'm just looking at the budget that was allocated under 1501, and that was $150,000. So essentially, you're asking to move from capital to operations $30,000 this year.
That's correct.
But most of that $150,000 hasn't been spent this year. So is there expected to be a surplus in that capital budget this year?
Actually, year to date, the majority of those funds have been spent or are committed to be spent. So what we looked at was the balance of funds that were projected to have by the end of the year within that capital project. Currently, we're projected to have probably around $40,000 remaining at this point that could be spent if we don't go forward with this. So there's a small amount that's left in there for contingency, so I haven't asked for the maximum amount that remains available. But of the $150,000, some of it is gone, the majority of it has gone to the term position in Public Works, the additional position or the additional responsibilities in facilities has gone to additional licensing and equipment. So the majority of that money has been spent.
And so is there going to be a capital ask for this project next year, or is it going to be operational?
No. So on a going forward basis, all aspects of the asset and risk management program will be operationalized. There will not be a capital ask. We were confident that with the equipment and the licenses that we're purchasing within the budget this year, that we will have the resources we require on the technical side to move forward for the foreseeable next few years. And for the human resources side of it, it makes more sense to operationalize that as it's an ongoing need than to capitalize it.
And then what's going to happen to the people that are currently working on this project in all their different departments?
Well, currently all those people are, on a going forward basis, they're still required. Like, for example, engineering has identified one of their engineers to work on the asset management responsibilities within their department. That's going to continue. This person is not going to be able to go in and replace within each department the work that has to be done in terms of the inputting of the information, the monitoring it, etc. So to give you an example, every time engineering does an upgrade on a road, resurfacing, that information has to be input into the WorkTech software and updated because it extends the life cycle of the asset. And then that is what needs to be reported on. So this person's role will not be to do the data entry at the departmental level. It will be to ensure that the departments are actually doing it, that they're doing it in a consistent manner and a standardized way across the departments.
So they'll be providing the data to that point person?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Is WorkTech something that's normally used in a municipality this small? Because it seems like it's a giant thing.
It's a big program. It has a large amount of functionality, much of which we're not currently using. For example, it can do inventory control. It can do purchasing, different things like that where we're not currently using it for. But yes, it is a common platform within many municipalities in Alberta and across the country. So there are a limited number of ready off-the-shelf asset management programs WorkTech is one of them that is commonly employed.
And so it's the appropriate size for our municipality?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Russell.
Thank you. If, assuming that we go ahead here with, when do you see a full implementation and operation of WorkTech?
So ideally, by the end of 2016, we would have all departments fully up and implemented in terms of their responsibilities for the inputting of information, and therefore also our ability to use that to generate the TCA reporting and the insurance commission. So that we're targeting end of 2016. That may be a little bit optimistic. It requires significant training of operators on the use of the program and ensuring that their uptake is in place.
Okay, so we're looking at this, and I guess what I'm seeing here, this is starting to look like a superhuman position you're advertising for. I mean, you've got someone coming in here. This WorkTech seems to be a monster that is taking up a pile of assets, and further to that, you're talking one person to be the coordinator, but we've got all these departments already that have asset management coordinators. It seems to look like we're going into a whole department.
So what's happened historically, we started the implementation in 2011, and it was something that was done sort of side of desk. So the IT manager was asked to lead the project, and each department was sort of asked to assign a responsible person to lead the project within their department. All of that remains in place, and a lot of the implementation that we've done up to date remains valid. However, we've not reached full implementation, so we're not using it, for example, to generate work orders. The goal is to have 100% of work orders generated by departments done through WorkTech, because what WorkTech will do is then they capture that information and it automatically updates the assets, right? So that we have that full picture. Some of that work is being done. Facilities is up to 80% of their work orders are currently being implemented. Public Works is lagging a little bit behind. They're not quite at that same level, but one of the difficulties, the challenges we face is that there's nobody technical with the ability to support the department on a full-time basis to reach that full implementation. So the WorkTech project is a big corporation-wide project. What it has lacked is a dedicated resource it's not an add-on to their job, but it's their sole job to lead and support the department in rolling this out. So it's a big job, but I wouldn't classify it as superhuman, because we have a foundation and we have infrastructure in place to support the position.
Another thought along the same line. So would this position ultimately have the effect of like a ripple effect throughout the other departments and actually reduce the demand on other employees?
That is the idea. First of all, there would be less need for support from IT, specifically for this project. And again, we're hoping to reduce some of the duplication that's ongoing within finance, within the municipal clerk's office. So yes, there should be that positive ripple effect.
Thank you. Councillor Steele.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Fark, you mentioned that there'd be a focus on the newer assets, anything built within 5 years. What about the older assets? Would that come into play at some point?
So the focus actually won't be on the new assets. It'll be on all assets. I put up the indication of the new assets simply to highlight that as a town, Canmore has brought on a significant number of assets in a very, very short period of time. Okay. And that for us, on a going forward basis, it's really important to understand not just the cost of building those assets, but maintaining them, repairing them, and eventually replacing them over time. Because we can't, basically, to bring on assets at the rate that we've been doing over the last 5 years is not sustainable. The cost required to maintain just these new ones is going to be significant, and it's not a cost that we've truly captured or factored into our planning up until this point.
Okay. Councillor Comfort.
Just an add-on question. So would the skills required for this position be more, say, IT or technical skills, or administrative or financial? Is it?
So we placed the position within the finance department because that's where it makes the most sense. The profile, could be it could be an engineer or a CET. It could be a, chartered accountant, a CA, or a CMA. The skills required are basically to understand asset management and to understand the assets and to be able to project manage. So it's more about the skill set that we're looking for than necessarily the profile of the individual.
So when you reference that IT, for all their noble efforts, didn't possess the skills to implement it, that's part of the problem. It's not so much an IT process in terms of implementing the software. It's more...
To be fair to our IT department, I didn't say they didn't have the skills.
No, but...
So they didn't have the time and the resources primarily. But at the end of the day, what IT was being asked to do was to oversee the implementation of a software program. They were not being asked to manage or implement a asset and risk management program, which are different things.
Okay.
And that would definitely be beyond the scope of what IT could do.
Okay, thank you.
I see no further questions. Do I? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
With that, I will move that council approve the creation of an FTE within the finance department for the purpose of implementing town-wide asset and risk management, and that council approve the allocation of up to $30,000 from capital project 1501 to fund the position for the balance of 2015. Speaking to that motion, I'll support the motion. I'm convinced of the value of this position to the town of Canmore and future planning. I thought Councillor Krauser's questions were good questions to ask and to remember when it comes time for council as the budget committee to be looking at the 2016 budget. I feel that this new position, if it's approved this evening, council may want to consider that as within the context of the other FTE positions that may be requested for 2016. Essentially, a bit of our approving capacity will have been taken up with this decision if it's successful. Councillor Krauser.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just further onto that note, I would hope that when we do get to budget time that this wouldn't be, obviously it'd be something that we've approved, but it wouldn't be part of the status quo. We should be noted that this is a relatively new position, so that we can be reminded of that.
Yeah.
Given the oversight responsibilities that we have and the reporting requirements as they're developing and becoming more stringent, and the potential financial benefits as well as the very real human resource benefits, I can't imagine that there would be something that would knock this out of priority for me where this at budget time, and therefore I'm comfortable in supporting this motion now, but I do need to underscore further to my question that it really has to be a rarity that we're put in this situation where we're having to imagine what we might be competing against in a budget that we haven't seen. So in this one I'm prepared to, but wouldn't want this to be a precedent.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I'll be happy to support this direction. Quite frankly, I'm surprised it's taken us this long to come to the point where we're accepting that we need this position. I worked with Lafarge for some time, and entering widgets and knobs and things into a giant program like this was a standard practice amongst most of the administrative staff that was being supervised in another bigger place. But with the amount of assets we have, it shouldn't be something that we're tracking on an Excel spreadsheet. It should be something that's in a program that will, in the end, actually save us money in terms of maintenance, in terms of staff time, and in terms of our insurance. So again, I'm happy to support this motion.
Councillor Russell?
I see the need for this position. Someone's gotta be here because nothing seems that we're not making progress. We've got staff that are beating their heads against the walls trying to get this stuff done. But I see this consuming a lot more budget next year because this is a department spawning itself. This job is, to me, I appreciate Mr. Park's statement that, this is all good. I think this is a monster undertaking that's gonna turn into the department. So, and if we need it, I guess we have to have it, but with apprehension, I'm supportive.
Further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Park. And I will call a short break, and then we'll come back for in-camera discussion. Okay, we're back in session. And I'll move to, if y'all don't mind, we're back in session. I'll move that we go in camera. Those in favor? Opposed?